can wait for justice, and then some of the mid-level executors might probably go through a different process of truth and reconciliation, provided that they are willing to cooperate. So this is where we are. And then the purpose of today's webinar is to look at what we have done as especially Congolese civil society, the diaspora of the Congo, what we have done in terms of raising awareness among our community, as well as lobbying for some of the international partners, both international civil society, as well as international officials, some of which have influence on the UN Security Council. What we have done as a Congolese diaspora to raise awareness, to promote this cause for justice in the DRC. That will be one aspect of today's webinar. And the second aspect is what can be done in terms of truth and reconciliation process, given the fact that first, the conflict is still ongoing. Most of the process of truth and reconciliation process assume a couple of things, that all the parties involved are ready to come together to discuss in good faith, to put on the table what happened, so that together we can engage in the process of forgiveness. But in the Congolese case, we don't know the name of the perpetrators of those crimes. And as a result, we have one side, the victims, and then on the other side of the table, there is nobody. In such a context, what does it mean to initiate a truth and reconciliation process? The second is that violence in the Congo, especially in the eastern part of the Congo, is still going on. So taking into consideration these two specificities of the DRC, what forms, what types of truth and reconciliation could be possible? So this will be the second aspect of today's discussion. To this end, we have three speakers, and I will be introducing each of them before they speak, but just to briefly introduce them individually, the first speaker will be Dr. Denis. I'm pronouncing your name correctly? Because the name, it sounds like a French name, and then I'm just pronouncing it in French. So Dr. Denis of Institute for Justice and Reconciliation of South Africa will be our first speaker. And the second speaker will be a Congolese human rights activist, Mr. Kambale Musavuli. He's of the Center for Research on the Congo. And the last speaker will be Mr. Vava Tampa of the Save the Congo. So let me first invite Dr. Denis. You have approximately 20 minutes to share with us, based on your experience of Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, what do you think could be the types, forms of Truth and Reconciliation process for the DRC, taking into account the two specific contexts in which the DRC is currently in? So the floor is yours. No, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
You hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Apologies, colleagues. I would say that I have to start with a proviso that whenever I speak about the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one has to come with a proviso that I don't think the world has really invented yet the mechanisms and processes that will heal the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It is a far more complex situation than most other conflicts I've been involved in, and would demand the Congolese themselves to design a process that will be up to scrutiny. But I can give you some pointers from our own experience. Let me just also, on a lighter note, Professor Mazwana, just say apologies for the background noise. I live next to the Belgium embassy, and the Belgium embassy is having a party today. So I was briefly thinking maybe we should go and have the seminar over there, and that would help us with the whole history of the Democratic Republic of the Congo much better, and have some mullen friet and some beer together. Maybe that will help us. But unfortunately, the Belgians are actually making some noise in the background right now as we speak. So maybe that's a metaphor, I don't know. I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity also. I'm no longer the director of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. I am a senior research fellow. I'm also linked to the University of Cape Town and to the University of George Mason in the United States. At the moment, I'm special advisor to the process in Rakhine, where the Rohingya Muslims have been driven out by the military, and trying to facilitate some social cohesion and ahead of what we hope will be the returns of the Rohingya to Rakhine province, which means working in war zone type conditions and trying to convince people on the ground to take the lead, because there's an absence of leadership from the top. And so this is where I'm involved now. Before that, I was in UNDP in Baghdad, Iraq, after ISIS's defeat, and helped to advise the UN on social cohesion measures, because there were also 5 million people displaced in Iraq post-ISIS, and to get those people back to their communities. So, but it's really good to speak with you about the Congo. I would also say that Africa will remain unfinished business, unhealed, an open wound, for so long as the Congo remains an open wound. And Africa's healing, Africa's restoration is solidly dependent on whether the Congo finds its way. It's also the place that should have been, I think, the Germany of Africa in so many ways. In any case, I would like to ask if I could share my screen and then just show you a short PowerPoint on some of our experiences in South Africa, hoping that you can see this now. Just indicate if you could, Professor, if you can see. Yes. Okay, so following your prompt earlier, some challenges. Let me start by making 2 or 3 comments that are framing comments. The first comment is this: the #1 priority ought to be in the Congo to stop the guns. Nothing else matters right now, in my view. It is to stop the guns from firing on people. It is the #1 priority because it is the highest form of justice if people no longer have to flee from bullets. And it is what every person on the ground says normally, is just stop the shooting first. And I think whatever we can do about that should be done. That is the #1 priority. If you say the violence is ongoing, if you say the atrocity is happening right now, then that would be the #1 priority. The second thing, I think, would be to articulate a common future, a shared future between East and West Congo, and to try and find some way in which that is communicated to everyone, that they have a place in the Congo, that they're welcome there, that they want it there, and that they'll have a future there. Only once that, and that does not need to take long. I mean, if you have the right political leadership, And again, I'm speaking from a largely an ignorant point of view because I'm many thousands of kilometers south of you. But if you were to find that common vision, then dealing with the past becomes a lot easier. It's trying to deal with the past in the absence of a plan for the future that that is complicated, because if you do that, people tend to wrap themselves up in the past and they never emerge out of it. So in order to have a clear plan of where you want to be going, I mean, that's more or less what we did in South Africa, is to first negotiate our new constitution. In 1986, 1987, people said South Africa will for sure be the world's largest battlefield of black and white racial war. It'll make anything north of us look like a Sunday school picnic by comparison. It'll be an extension of the Cold War, and a bit like North and South Korea. It'll be an ongoing point of conflict long after the Cold War is finished. We defied the odds by having been able to articulate some sort of preliminary future that said white and black people are both welcome in this country for the future. And by saying that and clearly communicating that, that released enough tension for us then to begin to say, let's have political negotiations about what that would look like. And in practical terms, we did very well in terms of the economic, in terms of the political structures and also the judicial structures. We did less well in terms of the economy, and so our inequality is still largely a racial inequality, and that remains an eyesore and a heart sore for any South African of good faith, and something that was a mistake of our transition. But be that as it may, we are not shooting at each other right now. We are actually in a far better position than we would have been if we had decided to fight in 1986. So dealing with the past, I think, becomes easier when you have some sort of idea of the future, because that justifies why you want to deal with the past. I'm not thereby saying, Professor, and I want to make this very clear, that I absolutely sequence it like that. I think justice needs to be an ongoing process, and part of stopping the guns in some cases is actually removing those perpetrators from the battlefield through indictments, etc. So I'm not suggesting wait until, I don't think justice comes after peace, etc. They're all concomitant challenges. They are going to have to tackle them together. However, I would say that dealing with the past is much easier when you have a vision for the future. And therefore, that is one of the most important things. The Congo needs a dynamic future, a dynamic vision, which buys people into this and which is supported by your friends elsewhere in the world. So that would be my opening comments. If I just quickly go then to the PowerPoint, I just want to also say, I think we should remember that the field we're talking about today is a very new field. It's young, it's 20, 30 years old. It's not a very old field. And therefore, we're still in our children's shoes as far as our concepts are concerned. And I think that's why I was very serious when I said the Congo needs to find its own way, because possibly you will introduce new concepts to the field which we have not yet developed. It's a new field because Boutros Ghali in the 90s did his paper on peace building, which basically made the point that political agreement is not enough. You need social change to underwrite the political agreements. And if you don't have social change, then political agreements will not work. And that was Boutros Ghali's basic point. And then this was then expanded upon by Jean-Paul Lederac in his well-known work on infrastructures of peace, which is basically saying, in terms of structural transformation, he proposed a methodology of how that can be linked to peace processes. So for the Congo, again, agreements are one thing, but if it does not coincide with some sort of changed reality on the ground, it will remain fragile. And I know I'm saying things that we all know, but I just want to remind us about this. And then I thought to mention to you that I think a framework for reconciliation that will take the Congo forward needs to be able to do three things. It needs to be able to tell you how to start where no start seems possible. With other words, I don't know of a reconciliation process anywhere in the world that begins when all the conditions are favorable. The conditions are always bad. They're always bad. And therefore, we must be realistic in what we design. It must be very realistic, and it must be taking into account that we are up against very, very harsh conditions. And therefore, whatever we decide to do needs to take into account the difficulty it will be that you will encounter in a position where no start seems possible. The only consolation I can offer you is that that is the same everywhere else. You never start a peace process without thinking it's going to be easy. It normally looks impossible. The second is that that justice is not just a matter for the courtroom. Justice is a matter for political negotiation. First and foremost, it's a matter for political negotiation. And whatever you do needs to be a process that has within it the resilience towards justice-orientated political negotiations, even while the spoilers and the violence are ongoing. So how can you motivate your politicians to stay at the table even when the violence is ongoing and the spoilers are trying their best to disrupt? And then thirdly, eventually, what needs to happen is social change, social healing, amid the fact that, and now I'm speaking as a South African, inevitably you will be disappointed with your progress because people have high hopes for these processes and they always fall short, but they do deliver you to a place that's better than where you were before. So being within a context of disappointment, how can you handle healing within that context? So for me, the theory of reconciliation, the framework that I developed, is based on a very simple idea. And that is the idea that we are in this together, interdependence. That if the one group suffers, the other group will eventually also suffer and will continue to suffer. Even in a place like Israel and Palestine, where you may think the Israelis can live while the Palestinians suffer, but actually their freedom is not complete. Their development is hampered. They are confined. They remain confined because there are people who are not free. That idea, that central idea that we are in this together, is the idea that drove transformation in South Africa, because apartheid was the policy that said we are not in this together. In fact, white people can be well off, have a lovely life here, and we just forget about the black people. It turned out to be a lie, and it turned out to be a lie at the political level, the economic level, the social level, the moral level, the environmental level, every single level. And I think the same is true of the Congo. I think that is so. It is that idea that we are in this together that will forge open a way where no way seems possible. It will keep the politicians at the table even when things go tough, and it will enable you to handle social healing when disappointments are high. So it is that idea that we have no choice. We reconcile because we have no choice. If we're brave enough to think about the future of our children and their well-being, then we have no choice but to reconcile. And that was the idea that drove South Africa's process. And then just to say that I also want to make a couple of process comments, which is the following. Justice mechanisms can backfire if they're not embedded in a political process backed by political leadership. And may I just say something about the importance of this here? We have to convince our politicians to rise to their better selves in this process. Without their contribution, it remains extremely unlikely that we will be able to implement successful processes. And that means political leadership has to be able to back transitional justice instruments without owning them. And that's a very difficult thing for a politician to do. You know, even in South Africa, or especially in South Africa, when Desmond Tutu was the chair of our commission, I remember distinctly how F.W. de Klerk, who was then deputy president, and also Thabo Mbeki, who was deputy president under Mandela, the two deputy presidents in the government of national unity, both came to Desmond Tutu saying, we want to have input in how you're going to write your report. We want to control the narrative. You know, de Klerk said this apartheid thing was only a good idea that just went bad. And Mbeki said the liberation movement was noble and never committed any crimes of human rights. And Desmond Tutu told both of them, I will not even meet with you. I will not meet with you because you are not coming to me with good faith. Instead, he met with Mandela, who understood this and backed him. So you need political leadership that's large enough to back the process, but not control it. Then also it's important not to over-determine. So elevate practices to principles, which I mean by that is the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission was an opportunistic mechanism that we developed because it helped us. There's nothing in the book that says the Congo's TRC must look like that. So a practice, which is the TRC, must not become a principle. The principles are different. Principles are the things that we want to achieve. And you need to develop a mechanism that suits your context. And it may well be a more devolved, more decentralized form of Truth Commission process than what we had, because of the size of your country and the different regions. Or it may not. It's not for me to say. And then also, you must be careful for underdetermination, which means that you're just doing a sequence of things that you think are good things, but you don't have any theory of change as to how this will actually change things on the ground. One needs to have a clear idea of what the changes will be, what the causalities will be in this. And then thirdly, it's important, I think, the two markers for reconciliation, which one has to always keep in mind with these processes, are inclusion and fairness. And I would say anything that happens needs to be progressively more inclusive and fairer. And fairness is not, I'm deliberately saying fair and not just, because justice is a high concept. Fairness is simple, it's straightforward. It's what people see and what they can feel. If people feel it's fair to them, it's okay, and you can proceed. If they don't feel it's fair to them, it's probably not okay. So it's inclusion. Are there people around the table that should be there? Next round, are there more people? Next round, are there even more people? And is there better fairness every time we do this? So those are for me the two markers of reconciliation. And then fourthly, I think that if we do embark on a process like that, what we've seen in South Africa, it has a sort of magic of its own. Whereas when you are more inclusive, processes tend to become fairer. And if processes become fairer, then they become more inclusive again. And so it becomes a virtuous circle that feeds itself. And those are some of the things I think we need to look at in the process. And then finally, I've listed, and I can share this with you on writing, we don't need to go through all of this, but Truth and Reconciliation Commission's specifically have limits and possibilities. Do not think Truth and Reconciliation Commissions are a silver bullet that can solve all your problems. For example, things TRCs cannot do. It cannot punish a crime commensurate to the crime. It cannot give a punishment commensurate to the crime. It cannot ensure remorse in the perpetrator. It cannot ensure that victims will walk away feeling reconciled. It cannot address all the atrocities of the past. It cannot uncover all the truth about an atrocity. It cannot allow all victims to tell their stories. There's simply, especially in the DRC, there will not be time, even if you had 1,000 years to tell all the stories. You cannot ensure that all victims will have closure at the end. You cannot ensure that that you will correct the imbalance between those who have and those who have not straight away. And you cannot ensure that those who are dissatisfied will not make further punishment demands. But what you can do in TRCs is the following. You can break the silence on the past. You can counter the denial that violations happened. You can provide a basis for common memory. You can provide a safe space for victims to engage their own feelings. You can begin to bring communities, institutions, and systems under moral scrutiny. You can contribute to the understanding of why perpetrators did what they did. One can provide symbolic forms of memorialization and reparation, and one can consider ways of promoting reconstruction by way of recommendations to government. Professor, I will stop there. I know I've gone over my time, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing with us, especially the what we can understand, we can remember as the preconditions to start where no start seemed possible, to start from the unthinkable, and to be creative, which means we have to find a way using our own imagination and understanding of our specific circumstances to come up with some specific process that could be imperfect, but suitable for the context of the DRC.
Thank you.
And then no matter what, you also mentioned the importance of political leadership and the political talk, political dialogue, and to be effective, true and reconciliation process needs to be supported, to be backed up by a political leadership, which imply a clear vision about the common future. And you also made it clear, reminded us that we cannot reconcile among ourselves, forgive what happened in the past, unless we have mostly a clear idea on the common future that we are trying to build. So that is really very important. And then you also reminded us that healing any social scars and handling the hope, aspiration of the people will still disappoint some of the folks. And then we should not expect the process to be perfect. It's a human process. We should be ready to embrace probably not only disappointment, but also so many different kinds of uncertainties. And then you ended up by sharing with us some of the things that can be done and some of the things that might not be done in the context of the DRC. So thank you. These are really some of the lessons I remember. We will talk about more during the Q&A, but just before we get to that point, if you can think about the fact that in the DRC, the involvement of the political system is a bit tricky, because among some of the suspects, some of those who are suspected to have been responsible of these crimes, most of them are the current political and military leadership of the country. So in such a context, what does it mean having the political leadership, the political involvement in the process of smoothing the reconciliation, the truth and reconciliation process? So keep that in mind, and during the Q&A session, we will be more than interested to hear your opinion on that. Thank you so much. So, and then that brings us to, whenever we talk about reconciliation, we talk about truth, we talk about justice, as the UN High Commissioner put it when presenting the mapping report on October 1st, 2010. She was asked a question during one of the brief interviews she did. She was asked the question, what will happen? What are the next steps after the publication of this mapping report? And then her answer was, it all depends on the Congolese people and their government. And I always remember this answer, because you can watch the video, it's still on YouTube. She didn't mention the UN or the international community. She mentioned Congolese people and their government in terms of what should be done for the mapping report next. And then among the Congolese, as I've said just a while ago, some of the suspect criminals, they are currently the leadership of the Congo, which means if based on the UN High Commissioner opinion, we have only the Congolese people left to push for any implementation of the UN mapping report recommendation. And then among the Congolese, those living in the Congo, given the widespread poverty and the limited access to information, most of them, there's so many folks in the Congo discovering the existence of this UN mapping report just this year. But the Congolese in the diaspora has been aware of this report for years. But still, although some activists, and some of them, the two speakers who are going to speak from now on, very few in the diaspora have been constantly in the last 10 years fighting for this report. Okay? And then, so my question to the first speaker, Mr. Kambale, thank you first for accepting to share your thought with us. What has been done by the DRC diaspora in Northern America? What can be done? And what can be done in terms of raising awareness of both the DRC diaspora as well as civil society in that part of the world, and what can be done in terms of mobilizing the DRC diaspora and strengthen the capacity to lobby some of the world leaders in that part of the world. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. I want to start by sharing two stories. One is a meeting I had with a Congolese woman. Her name is Marie-Claire Faray. In the early 2000s, she came in the United States. I was very young at the time, trying to understand what's happening in advocacy. And she was part of a women network, a Congolese women network in many different countries. And it's through the network that I met her. And she shared with me, on the first day I met her, she shared with me the story of Mwenga and what happened to the women in Mwenga. This is way before the UN mapping report was published. In Mwenga, rebels supported by the Rwandan government went into the village in Mwenga, and they accused the people of the village for supporting some of the resistant combatants, the Mai Mai and the others. And they subjugated the entire village into pretty much torture. They raped the women in public. They beat the population. They burned some of the women. And then they bury about 22 of them alive. That's the numbers from the population. In the UN report, I think they put the number to about 17. So they buried these women alive. So she shared with me the story saying that even for herself, coming into this work, there were people who came before, that we need to keep our collective memory. Right? She was very intentional in letting me know, Kambale, always remember there are people for centuries for the Congo who have been fighting for the liberation of Congo. It started the moment the Portuguese came in the 1400s. It continued with Kimpavinta when she started fighting to liberate the people of the Congo Basin. It continued with Simon Kimbangu. It continued with Lupungu II in the Kasai region. It continued with Patrice Lumumba. That the Congolese people have always been in the struggle to regain the sovereignty. The crisis that we're seeing now is a microcosm of the larger issue, historical issue that we have, right? So that, I'm sharing that story to say that the crime of the Mwenga was being discussed by Congolese women in many fora. And when I met one of the Congolese women, before the UN mapping report was published, she shared with me that story. The second one is from another Congolese elder. His name is Lubangi Munyanya. Young activists in New York, mobilizing people, doing activities, protests and so on. And you always watch me, give me wisdom. Sometimes he may not say much. But one day he shared with me, he said, Kambale, do you think you are the first person who has ever done a protest in New York? And I was surprised by the question. And I said, no, I'm sure there are people, I'm surprised that there are not many Congolese engaged. We'll do activities, we see Americans coming, there are a few Congolese who support, and so on. So he shared with me the Mobutu era. He shared with me a huge protest of over 1,000 people in the United States, including Congolese, back then Zairian, who were mobilizing against Mobutu, and they were in front of the United Nations. And he said, if you're not the first person to do this, why are you continuing to do what we've done in the past? Right? So it was very interesting. These two stories caught my eye in even listening to Dr. Dutoit as he was explaining the truth and reconciliation process, right? It's really important for us to know our history. As we even discuss just what Congolese people are doing, Congolese people for centuries have done so much to liberate the country. They are in the middle of a system of exploitation, which every few decades or centuries manifests itself differently and the population suffer from it. But for the discussion that we are having on the UN mapping exercise report, we can't talk about justice in DRC if we're not telling the truth. That's really for me, it's the basis, right? The justice cannot happen if there is no truth, because we will discuss a Congolese truth and reconciliation. Congolese are going to reconcile with who? With themselves. If we are going to reconcile with ourselves, how many times have we reconciled with ourselves, right? We've reconciled with ourselves even before the war. We had the Conférence Nationale Souveraine. I remember being a young Congolese with my paper and pen, writing the election between Tshisekedi and Kanza. They were counting the votes on TV. Tshisekedi, I put one line. Kanza, I put another line. I counted the votes, right? This was an example of a transparent election that Congolese people themselves have had. I've witnessed other dialogues, right? We've had truth and reconciliation in Lusaka. We had truth and reconciliation in Sun City. We had truth and reconciliation in Nairobi. We had Truth and Reconciliation in Arusha. Congolese are the experts in truth and reconciliation, in dialogue. But how do we explain that we have gone through all these processes, that we are still not getting to the truth? Because the truth is not being told. Reconciliation is being pushed, but truth is not being told. And the UN mapping exercise report, for those who are watching, we may get into the discussion and not even realizing what this report is really. Why do we have a report at the United Nations speaking about crimes in the Congo? It goes to what I shared in the beginning. Congolese people have lived the violence, have worked globally to mobilize and organize, letting people know that the second deadliest conflict since World War II is happening in the country. That's why that report exists. There is nothing in the UN mapping exercise report that Congolese have never said. Not because I say it. For anyone who has read the UN mapping exercise report, which documents 617 incidents in the DRC, the most serious violation of human rights and international law, humanitarian law, it has for each incident sources. The standard is at least 3 sources, right? And with this incident, the 3 sources, most of them are usually Congolese on the ground. The survivors, human rights organizations, and other entities, right, who have witnessed that. So all the mapping report did was bringing the truth Congolese people knew into an official document that the international community can look at and say, Congolese have been saying this since 1996. Now in 2010, almost 20 years later, let's go ahead and put something official. That's the context of the incident, right? And it only documents crimes from 1993 to 2003. And we all know crimes have continued. And we have over 6 million Congolese who have died in this conflict due to that. Now, with this report, as we pointed out, we say that what the Congolese government can do. I know what Congolese people have done. I know where Congolese people were on October 1st, 2010. The Congolese people of North America on that day were in front of the United Nations in the rain, making sure that they witnessed the release of the report. We had American allies and others who actually flew into New York to make sure that they were there. I remember Gary Uwele of Bakolo State, he has his own media. He was with us in the group. He said, at 12 o'clock, I'm going in to get the report. And we all were there waiting. He goes into the United Nations. He comes out, he says, it's not yet released. We waited, he goes back. And when he went in there, right, it was very symbolic to really remember that day, because I was there too that day. He went in and came back with this thick piece, like this book. It comes up in front of the Congolese. We all are cheering. We now have the report. And he reads the executive summary, not the whole report, just the executive summary for the people there. I remember the feeling of the Congolese. It was a victory. Why was it a victory? This report was being blocked by the United Nations, particularly a member of the Security Council. And that Security Council member was the United States. Why? Because one of its allies, Rwanda, was blackmailing the United Nations, saying that this report will not be published. Why? Because the report said that there have been war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide if proven in a competent court. And it implicated the government of Rwanda for committing genocide in the Congo. And Rwanda said, if this report is published with the term genocide, I will remove my troops from Haiti, from Mali, or any other UN operations. Ban Ki-moon had to fly to Kigali, tell Paul Kagame that this report is not a judiciary report. No one will be arrested. Please allow this report to be published. And it was edited. The term genocide was changed into possible genocide if proven in the competent court. Congolese watch all of this. So Congolese have been active. Some have said they may be in a minority, others may say they've been maybe in numbers, but that's been our struggle. In 1958, young Congolese mobilized for independence. Within 2 years, Congolese people as a whole benefited. There may have been those who felt that it was okay to live under Belgian colonialism, but there were still the valiant Congolese who say, no, we must make sure that we are free of colonialism, that we are controlling our country. And that has been the case for this UN mapping exercise report of why this is important. I will end by saying that, whenever we're looking at this discussion of a UN mapping report, for me, it gets emotional. It gets emotional because I'm coming from a region where family members, direct family members, people that I know have been killed and continue to be killed. My family hails from Beni and Butembo. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I think it's actually less than a couple of weeks ago, a young Congolese that many people know passed away. Sent condolences to his family. That will be Cindy Kandokolo. I'm speaking about him actually. He passed away. The story was touching, the way he died. And the fact that he's given also some of his time for the Congo to see a better Congo. But I was touched that day, not because of his death. I was touched that day because on that same day he was killed, there was news that 17 people were massacred in the Beni area. And I was surprised to see on that same day, on many people's social media feeds, condolences being sent to Syndicat. As I say, I send mine too as well. But I said, there is something happening to us as Congolese. How can one Congolese as Syndicat Ndokolo die, that we feel remorse, but 17 people on that same day were massacred in the Beni area in the eastern part of Congo? I have not seen any condolences sent for those 17. And they are not the only 17. Every week, someone is being killed. Every week, people are continuing to be killed. Why are they continuing to be killed in the Congo? That's why a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or process cannot happen if the guns are not put down. And that's where I join Dr. Dutoit in saying, until they stop the killing, we can engage in a process. We have done that. That's why I gave the history of Congolese dialogue. We are experts in dialogue. We must stop the killing. We know who is killing us. People in Beni know who is killing us. The United Nations knows who is killing us. They've published numerous reports saying who is killing us. Right? If we don't hold them accountable, if we don't stop the killing, we won't even be able to get to justice. We won't even be able to get to peace. And in order to do that, that's the hard work that Congolese people have to do. The warlords of yesterday are wearing suits in Kinshasa. The people who committed a crime yesterday, whose names are in this confidential annex in Geneva that the United Nations has refused to release, are ruling the Congo today. I will use Dr. Mukwege's comment a few weeks ago. He made an excellent interview. There is no justice process in DRC that will work if we don't engage the international community because of the jurisdiction. Let's use an example that we have an international tribunal in Congo and we find James Kabarebe, the Rwandan military officer, guilty. Which international treaty are we going to use to have him extradited to the Congo? Right? And the reason why the Truth and Reconciliation Commission or any justice process in the Congo needs the international community is because the perpetrator of the crimes are international. From Washington to London to Kigali, Kampala, and Kinshasa. That those who will be on the outside will have to have the international collaboration. And that's the recommendation also I support. I understand the complexity of what is happening in the DRC, but I think Congolese, we've resolved many complex situation. Nobody believed that Congo could become independent in 1960. Who are these young people in the 30s mobilizing to stop Belgian paratroopers shooting at them on January 4th, 1959? No one believed that that was possible, but these young people were able to do it. We are in a situation that is unique, right? So we continue to have situations that are unique in DRC that requires for us Congolese to resolve them. The appeal for every Congolese, wherever they are, is to be engaged in your countries. If, let's say, you live in Sweden, engage the Swedish government. They found these nations on the African continent, particularly Congo's neighbors and sometimes the Congo, that there should be conditionality around justice. And I think I'll bring it to a closing in thinking about the Nuremberg trial. I always use that as a quote because I've studied the Nuremberg trials just for my own knowledge, because I think World War II was really a scar on the human conscience. In Europe, millions of Jews were killed in inhumane conditions. So as we say that the Congo is the second worst conflict, is the first worst conflict since World War II, we as Congolese have to study what actually happened in Europe. What was the occupation like? Who occupied Europe? Why did he occupy Europe? Why did he target the Jewish community? And how did they go through a justice process? And because there are some similarities. So I read the prosecutor, I think the Robert Jackson, his closing remarks always is touching to me, right? 8 months trial, right at the end of World War II, right? They put out the guns, the Nazis were defeated, and now the trial. And he reminded the world, him as a son of a Jewish family who's seen his own siblings, his own family members also massacred, the importance of justice for the crimes committed, be it by people that we knew or not, right? And why it must happen. It was a swift process right at the end of World War II. Congo is in the same way now. We must defeat the Nazis of today. And I'm using that as a metaphor for the crimes being committed. Looking at the Nazis, what they did is also what's happening in the Congo, that the Congolese population, 450 ethnic groups on that land, are being targeted in areas where there is land, there are resources, they're being targeted for who they are, and they are suffering a genocide. People have argued if there is genocide or not. I am very clear about why people in Tingi were massacred. I am very clear that in Kitona, the Congolese soldiers who were killed there, they were not killed because they were from Thailand. I know why they were killed. I know why the people around Kenge were also killed. I know why people in Beni, as I'm speaking, right, they are being killed. They all are being killed beyond their ethnicity, as because they are Congolese. Lawyers can debate it. Victims, extended members of family members of those who have been victims know what is happening to them. It is time for justice for Congo. And we cannot have justice if there is no truth. And peace can't happen if there is no justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very touching. It's a bit emotional for me too. I cannot really summarize your emotion. Everyone have listened and can feel what you have felt. But I can just start from sharing, connecting with what you mentioned about the Nuremberg Declaration of Peace. I remember clearly one of the statements that says that peace and justice, no matter what, they are complementary and it's impossible to separate them. And the question is never or can never be whether justice should be implemented, should be pursued. That the question can never be in that way. The only question is when and how we pursue justice. So in the case of the Congo, we Congolese, is based on your account of the release of the mapping report in October 1st in New York, I do also clearly remember the picture of Gary Wele with those pages, and I try to find it to share on the screen, but I cannot find it on Facebook. But I have the picture. I talked with Gary Wele the same day. He called me and he was almost crying on the phone. And I remember that picture very well. And I remember all the efforts, especially in New York, in Geneva by the Congolese on that day, because in Geneva also, there was a group of Congolese meeting at the Palais de la Paix, the UN headquarters in Geneva, for the same purpose. And then I also remember one thing, important things you mentioned, the crisis, the current crisis and violence in the Congo is deeply rooted in history. So this is one dimension that very often we Congolese don't pay much attention to, especially when you look at some of the atrocity that happened in the Congo during the Leopold II era. You'll be stunned and surprised to find so many similarities with ongoing conflict, especially in terms of violence, in terms of impunity, in terms of the exploitation of natural resources, and in terms of the traffic of those mineral resources and intermediaries involved. Somehow, people will be surprised to find that some of the same companies under different names as they are known today are involved in both the previous crimes and exploitation of natural resources and the ongoing ones. And we Congolese sometimes don't pay much attention into this. So next, let's invite Vava Tampa to share with us on the same issue of Congolese involvement in this struggle in the UK in particular or in Europe in general. Vava, the floor is yours.
Professor Jean-Claude, merci trop, merci Mingi. Thank you to all. It's amazing to be with my brother Kambale, Professor Dutoit. Amazing to listen to all of you. Couple of things I would like to put into context. The first thing is, it's really, really essential and crucial. I don't want anyone to leave this place, this webinar, thinking the Congolese conflict or what's going on in Congo is complex. It's not. It's amazingly straightforward. It has always been amazingly straightforward. We know the perpetrators, we know where their money is coming from, we know where the guns are coming from, and we know the victims, the survivors. We see them, we meet with them, we know their voices, we know their testimonies. So the crisis, this situation is amazingly clear. So that must be really, really clear. I think it's also essential to, I want to jump into, because Kambale has spoken already about so many other things I wanted to touch on. So I want to jump straight away on the issues of justice, and then I'm going to come back on what we are doing in the UK and across Europe. Justice is a process. And that process, the way I understand it, starts with the truth. And that truth, which we have all mentioned, that truth starts by essentially screaming out, even on social media and across the world, who are the perpetrators, is being able to say publicly that, look, this crisis, it's not a Congolese. You did not find, there isn't a Congolese ethnicity that rose up against another Congolese ethnicities. We have over 450 different ethnic groups in Congo. All of us are minorities in our own right, and we have all lived peacefully ever since. The only disappointing, the only heartbreaking episode in our history I have been able to find has been what Mobutu and Mobutu did in Katanga, or during when it was still called Shaba in 1993, when the Baluba people were targeted with Mzee Kyungu, who's now, sort of become a reformed human beings now. That's the only disappointing episode in our history in which you saw someone using politics to kind of target people on ethnic lines. Besides that episode, we don't have any other episode. And this crisis came from Rwanda. It came from Rwanda into Congo, and we know how that happened. So the truth, that process for us begins with justice, being able to explain this clearly, that this is an imported crisis. It came from outside. This is not a Congolese crisis in the making, which has an implication on issues of reconciliation. How do we reconcile when the crisis is actually an external, something which has been imported into Congo? So that's the first thing, to be absolutely clear. The second element to these issues of justice, it's being able to hold people criminally accountable for the atrocities, for the crimes committed in Congo. Without that, nothing can happen, nothing can advance. And we have seen, Kambale has touched on this, like, look, over the last 20 years, we have done as a people, we have done anything and everything possible in the names of reconciliations, in the name of peace. We have gone to Lusaka, we have gone to Sun City, we have gone to Nairobi, we've gone to Rwanda, we've gone to Arusha, we've gone to the UN, we've gone to across the world in the name of peace and reconciliation. All sorts of conversation and concertation and dialogue has happened within Congolese and between Congolese and so forth, but that has not worked. The international community, on the other hand, has even sent the largest UN peacekeeping forces into Congo in the hope of keeping peace, but there is no peace to be kept. Money has been invested, about 1 billion or 1.5 billion a year in the name of building democracy or organizing elections and so on and so forth. Still nothing has materialized. There is nothing concrete that the international community can say over the last 20 years, this is what we have achieved in Congo. There is nothing. Peace remains an illusion, it remains a dream. And that is because of one thing, because of impunity. Okay, the only way, the only thing which we have not tried, the only thing we haven't yet done over the last 20 years has been to hold people responsible for the killings of Congolese people accountable. And that is really, really significant. The third element to this process of justice for me is once you speak the truth, once you expose the truth, once you're able to name and shame those responsible, and once you're able to hold them accountable, criminally accountable. And here I'm going to come back to this point. We are pushing for the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. And the reason we are pushing specifically for that creation is really simple. Look, I remember, look, internationally speaking, I'm gonna share a private conversation I had with a minister in the UK. Internationally speaking, there is agreement across the board in the UK, in the US, within the EU level, that there needs to be some sort of justice. The question, which Kambale touched on, the question is, what forms of justice are we going to give to the Congolese people? I had a conversation with a British minister for Africa, and she was really, really clear. And by saying she, you can easily pinpoint who she was. She was fascinatingly clear. She said to me, "Wow, look, we are willing to support this. What you guys want, what you're calling for, the issues of justice, but we are only going to support mixed chambers, we are now going to support the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. And that is really clear. The reason they want to support mixed chambers, and the reason we have been clear and being absolutely clear from the onset, from 2010, saying there needs to be an international criminal tribunal for Congo, is because if you have an international criminal tribunal for Congo, then everyone implicated, whether they are Congolese or not, whether they are Rwandan or not, Ugandan or not, also they would be held criminally responsible, and their government would have to send them to face justice in Congo. However, if you have a mixed chambers, the sort of mixed chambers we had in Cambodia, for instance, or even Sierra Leone and so forth, it's amazingly open to political manipulation. The politics of Congo can easily manipulate, and government who are the people who are not Congolese are not necessarily going to face justice if you have a mixed chambers. So I'm going to come back to this point again. So the first point I mentioned in this process of justice is the truth. Naming and shaming people responsible. This is why you see me often on social media calling and naming and shaming people like James Kabarebe, like Paul Kagame, Yoweri Museveni, all those people responsible, being able to name and shame them, speaking the truth, incredibly essential. The second element is being able to hold people criminally responsible. This is where we are. This is the stage where we are. After this second element, that would lead us to the third element. It's building a different sort of society, which somehow touches on the point which Dr. Dutoit mentioned, sort of being able to outline, to express a global, a wider vision, which would be able to sort of bring all the different Congolese who are victims, who had, who are survivors, who had played part in the criminalities and so forth, bringing them together and then building a new Congo forward. So those are the three processes of justice. Now, I want to add another element, which I mentioned before. When I say Congo, the Congolese crisis is not complex. It's really, really straightforward. Congo finds itself in the intersection of three elements, three evil dreams. On the first part, and those essentially intertwine, okay? On the first element is Rwanda. Paul Kagame's view wishes essentially to destabilize, to balkanize Congo. That is factual. Paul Kagame, and Yoweri Museveni and James Kabarebe and a few other people want a section, a part of Congo to be balkanized, to become independent, to play as a buffer zone between Rwanda and Congo for many reasons. Partially is to do with populations, the fact that Rwanda is overpopulated. The second element is an issue of natural resources. I'm going to come back to this point again. The third element is because Kagame also understands the crimes his regime has committed in Congo. Congolese are not going to forgive it. Congolese are not going to forget it. And he understands, and I have said this to him almost face to face, that look, even your bones, we would arrest your bones and hold it accountable in prison in Congo for the crimes you committed. So the creation of this buffer zone of another country between Congo and Rwanda is really, really dear to Kagame. That's the first element. The first reason, one of the key reasons we are in this crisis, because Kagame wants to balkanize Congo, and Museveni and other people are supporting him. And then in this first element comes another element, which is the second point, which is multinational look at this dream, this plan, and start say, oh my God, there is so much money to be made, there is so much natural resources. So they jump in and in attempts to loot natural resources, which create another level of intensity of this crisis. And within this nasty cocktails of wanting to destabilize Congo comes in the third element. The third element, and we need to accept this, and this has been showed by Black Lives Matter across the world. The third element is there are people, there are government, policymakers in London, in the West, in the US, who essentially look at Congo and sort of say, you know what, if that country, if they get it together, if that country becomes successful, the whole Africa goes forward. And if the whole Africa goes forward, the balance of power internationally would become upset. Now, if you want to somehow displease, or if you want to kind of to refrain or to stop Africa from moving forward, from becoming a success, what do? The only thing you do is you destabilize Congo. If you destabilize Congo, the whole Africa becomes destabilized. You remember this clearly. There was a Martinican guy, Frantz Fanon, in the 1960s, a little bit good looking like me, who made it very, very clear, sort of said, oh, Africa is shaped like a gun and Congo is the trigger. If Congo goes, if that trigger goes off, the whole Africa and goes forward. So those are the key elements to understand that Congo is not a complex crisis. These are the three intersections Congo finds itself in. So the key element here, the key issues, we've tried everything else. We've tried peacekeeping, we've tried humanitarian aid, we've tried democracy by organizing election even in the middle of wars and crises. We have tried all these elements and they have not worked. They have not worked because of impunity. And so the only answer here is justice. Now, this leads me to what we are doing in the UK and across Europe. Now, over the past couple of months, young Congolese across Europe, across London specifically, we have been tweeting something called #Congo's-bleeding. And this is a hashtag which few friends and I are now trying to sort of organize to turn into a movement. And Congo's, why, when we say Congo's bleeding, what do we mean? Congo's bleeding because of the killings. Over 5.4 million people were killed in the first 10 years, 1998 to 2008, 5.4 million people killed. That is the largest mass killing in the world since World War II. Congo's bleeding means the use of rape as a weapon of war and its effect on women, on their families, on their communities, and on their country. Congo's bleeding means that over 5 million Congolese, as we speak today, are displaced because of violence. Congo's bleeding means the UN mapping report said 617 crime incidents. And when the mapping report said incident, this is really interesting because they are reports that the earliest version of the mapping report actually said 617 war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. The reason they were not turned or redrafted into incident of, or violations of gross violation of international humanitarian laws and so on and so forth, it's simply another way of saying these are war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide. And they were shaped or changed in those ways because there were pressure from the US. And this pressure was partially led by Susan Rice at the UN and few other people who pressured the UN to redraft the wording of that report in order to give, if you like, Kagame a free pass, or if you like, a slap on the wrist. And this is what this was done. So when we say Congo's bleeding, we are saying that these crimes were committed and no one has been held accountable. In a nutshell, Congo is bleeding. The reason Kambale mentioned Beni, the killings in Beni, 17 people recently, people continue to die on a daily basis. We saw it in Kasai recently, in a space of 2 years, over 80 mass graves being found by UN experts and no one held accountable. We saw it in Yumbi, over 50 mass graves found in a space of 6 months, no one held accountable. We see across the world, we see in Maluku, another mass grave found, no one held accountable. We see it across the board, we see it recently in Kipupu, and this is a story I also wanted to mention to simply highlight the extent of impunity. In July 2020, in Kipupu, which is in South Kivu, about less than 4 hours away from Panzi Hospital where Dr. Denis Mukwege works. So in Kipupu, 250 people killed, massacred. Okay, that's in July. Mukwege goes out, send a tweet, not even an interview, a tweet. And because of that tweet, and because Kagame, Rwanda felt directly touched by that tweet, because we now have an understanding that the militia gang that committed the crimes in Kipupu could be essentially another recreation of the of M23. Okay, so this could be another new militia gang which is being funded by Kigali. But in a nutshell, so Mukwege sent a tweet and he receives death threat. And he receives direct threat from James Kabarebe on national TV in Rwanda. That same July, and this is really significant to understand, that same July, our new president, Felix Tshisekedi, decided to promote, guess who? Gabriel Amisi, from being a general to becoming an inspector general of the National Army. Gabriel Amisi is responsible for a lot of atrocities in Congo. In fact, as we spoke in that same July when we were speaking, even now, he is under international sanction. And you have the president of a country promoting someone under international sanction. For what? It amazes you. And that same government took 6 weeks, and this point will never cease to make it. The government, Tshisekedi, took 6 weeks to make an argument or to come in support of Mukwege. And that says a lot. That gives you an idea of the level of impunity in Congo. So Congo is bleeding because of impunity, and that impunity needs to be brought to an end. This is why we are pushing and calling for the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. And that international criminal tribunal for Congo must be created, must be in Congo. If the EU, if the UN, if the US, if the UK can support an election, organize an election in 2006, in the middle of a war in Congo in 2006, because remember, it was in 2008 that the IRC published its report, which said over 5.4 million Congolese had been killed. It was in 2010 that the UN published their mapping report. It was in 2011 that the Journal of Public Health in the US published that over 1,200 women are being raped on a daily basis in Congo. If all of that, if we can organize an election, a referendum, an election in Congo in 2006, we can support and maintain an international criminal tribunal for Congo in Congo. This is our dreams. This is a fight which we are deeply committed in. And I know hundreds of Congolese, thousands of Congolese across the country and across the world who are doing the same work. And until we get to this point, until we get to that point to end impunity, because peace begins with justice, no peace could return in Congo. And until we those issues of impunity is brought to an end, then we can begin to think and reconcile with other communities. When couple of years ago, I wrote an article for Forbes on virtually the similar issues, in which I talked about, look, when it comes to Congo and Rwanda, and we mentioned Rwanda specifically because Kagame has done the worst crimes in Congo. When it comes to Congo's relationship with Rwanda and so forth, we find ourselves in a very difficult situation, because on one hand, you have Kagame, who has committed terrible crimes against Congolese people in the name of protecting the Tutsis. And you have Hutus, FDLR, who have committed also terrible crimes against the Congolese people in the name of you are supporting a brutal government, your government is supporting a brutal government in Rwanda, Kagame, and so on and so forth. So we find ourselves in that tricky situation now. Congo and Rwanda, and similarly Congo and Uganda, and Congo and all the Burundi and all different countries that were implicated in Congo would remain where they are until Jesus returns. We would find ways to deal and to talk to one another and to cooperate and to rebuild relationship. But that relationship between our people, between our countries, socially, culturally, financially, development, and so forth, would not happen until there is justice, until people like Paul Kagame, people like James Kabarebe, people like Yoweri Museveni are brought to justice. I'm going to end on that note. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Vava. Let me quickly, briefly pinpoint a couple of issues you emphasize. So on the root cause of the conflict in the Congo, or the violence in the Congo, I should say, you emphasize the view that Congo was caught at the intersection of three different elements. One is the ambition of Rwanda. The second is multinational opportunity to grasp DRC natural resources. And the third is a sort of geopolitical interest blocking the Congo in attempt to slow down the process of African development. And then coming down to the Congo violence itself, you mentioned the campaign Congo is Bleeding that you and other folks in the UK have been actively involved in. We have seen it everywhere in social media. Thank you so much for that. And you have been also calling, as a result of that campaign, you have been emphasizing naming or shaming some of the people commonly known for being involved in the crimes committed in the Congo. And then you have been joining the call for the creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for the DRC. Thank you so much. And now the floor is open for questions. For those who are not familiar with Zoom, there is a button. You can raise your hands by pushing that button, and then I will be able to see your name and give you permission to speak. Once you have permission to speak, do a couple of things. First, switch on your microphone. And then second, I will move you from being a participant to a panelist. And then eventually you have a choice to switch on your camera so that we can see you when raising your question. And please be brief, okay? If you have a comment, don't speak for more than a couple of minutes. If you have a question, make sure that you keep your question brief so that we have time to address your question. So the first, I think there is a hand raised by Mr. Kabeya. Anishai Kabeya.
Okay, thank you for the speech. I would like just to understand, since we've been for plus minus more than 2, maybe 3 months now, listening to the mapping teams, you guys having these meetings that are very, very interesting, and we really, really appreciate your initiatives. But we would like to know, who are you having to talk to? Are you already having targeted people that you are talking to so that this can change, so that whatever you are intending to achieve be achieved? Because we've followed a couple of your meetings. We want to know which kind of actions are being taken, while in the meantime, the different meetings to let people aware of what has been going on in terms of mapping reports. In the meantime, which kind of activity, which kind of actions have you guys taken so long to bring those who have to decide for the criminal, criminal tribunal to come now and play its role? Are you also talking to different president of Africa, Union of Africa president? If you, what are you really doing so that we know that, okay, if people have to bring hands and brain, this is where and what they can do to reach the solution? Because we now really need something to be done than just carrying on with meetings. So if you could associate people in all the projects that you have in terms of different actions to be taken, so that these can come to the solution which we all want, like to see the criminal being judged. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't know who is going to take that question.
I can answer that quickly.
Okay.
In terms of justice, Kabir, there is 4 things we are asked in terms of what to do actions. There are 4 things we are asking people to do. To make it easier for everyone to understand, we call them the 4 S. Okay, the 4 S's to do. The first S is, if you're on social media, share the message. Share the, share the mapping report, share about Congo's bleeding. So that's the first S, share the message. You're sharing it to raise awareness, to mobilize awareness. The second S is speak up. Speak up against the killings in Congo. Speak up against the use of rape as a weapon of war. Speak up against impunity in Congo. Speak up against the targeting of Congolese voices of peace like Denis Mukwege. Speak up against the looting that's going on in Congo. The third S is sign the petition. Okay, there is a petition which is being hosted at an Amnesty International website, which is calling for justice, justice to end impunity, justice for crimes committed, crimes documented in the UN mapping report. That petition needs to be signed, so sign it. The fourth S is about support. Support and amplify Congolese voices for justice. Okay, so when, look around you, see Congolese voices, people who are pushing for peace, people who are pushing for justice, support those voices and amplify it. Those are the 4 S's. Again, remember, share the message, speak up, sign the petition, support and amplify Congolese voices. Those are the 4 things to do. Internationally, globally, across the world, what we are doing is we are doing a lot of lobbying. We are pushing for the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. In the UK and across Europe, we are organizing ourselves through the mapping report to launch a wider campaign, which every Tuesday and every Thursday, we would ask everyone in the world to tweet Joe Biden for the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. So we are pushing for this idea. We are more organizing ourselves, conversations are being had, and I'm optimistic that we will get to that point and we will see the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. Maybe Kambale wants to add something on to in terms of actions or conversation which are being had.
And I want to ask permission to speak in both English and maybe Lingala and French, because I noticed there are some Congolese also who are watching us from Kinshasa. That would be good for them to also have actions. I'll start with the French and my broken Lingala.
Can you start with English and before
okay.
French?
No, I mean, in terms of actions, right? We can give you the 1, 2, 3 actions. It's great to have those things. But I want to share like my experience of even how I got into this work to know how to stay engaged. Because we don't need you just for action now, but we really want you to stay engaged. I was asked one time to just make a phone call to a radio station. Al Sharpton was on the radio asking people to call in. If you have a chance to speak with Obama, what would you say? Somebody would think it's crazy to pick up the call a radio station, be on hold for 20 minutes, and then you have something to do. I did that. I waited, and somehow I was picked up, and then I went on air, right? Calling a radio station, writing op-ed articles. I want us to not think that there are other people who will do it, right? So there are these activists who are doing ABCD. What can we do to support you? It's great. But as Congolese, it's actually much more important that you yourself also join and do what we are doing. If we have to reach out to nations on the African continent, the African Union has a website. The African Union have African Nations Delegation account. You go to the website, you pull out the email, you pull up the phone number, you call. I used to call the White House. Really strange thing. I would literally call the White House and just leave a message. I don't know who listened to it or not, but it's important for Congolese themselves, beyond asking what others are doing, like the usual suspects, right? The human rights organization, the activists, but the ordinary Congolese to also join that call. That will mean the things that we want to see. If we want to put pressure on the nation, wherever you are right now, I believe in the country you are, you can call the government of the country where you live to ask them to support the call for Congolese in the creation of an international tribunal in Congo. So that's my submission. Now, I'm going to ndeko na biso kabea ngai koyeba ndenge nini tokosalisa batu pona ba participer na ba action tozosala. La recommandation sera toujours que c'est important pour na Congolais bango moko bazala actif na makambo oyo. Pona na ba sala tosala tokanisa toujours tozala ba activistes. Ba activistes c'est eux qui doivent aller à l'avant, qui doivent participer. Qu'est-ce que vous pouvez faire pour faire pression aux Nations Unies, à l'Union africaine? Mais ce qui est plus important que Congolais, c'est exemple souvent dans le téléphone, dans la chaîne de radio. Et quand j'appelle la chaîne de radio, je dis clairement, j'appelle pour tel et tel sujet. Et il y a des années, souvent je prenais mon téléphone et j'appelais juste la Maison Blanche. Je ne sais pas qui écoute, mais je le faisais. Donc, pour les Congolais qui sont en train de suivre ça, c'est très, très, très important qu'on ne regarde pas qu'il y a un groupe de gens, des activistes de droits de l'homme, des organisations de droits de l'homme qui doivent faire ce travail. Nous avons besoin de tout Congolais et être actifs dans votre pays. Et l'appel, c'est vraiment supporter la création du tribunal international, le tribunal pénal pour le Congo. Vous voulez le faire dans votre pays, contactez le gouvernement du pays là où vous êtes. Et organisez-vous là-bas en suivant ce que nous sommes en train de faire, mais aussi vous avez des idées qui peuvent être meilleures que nous. That was all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next, Mr. Joseph Ushandi. Switch on your microphone. Okay, please go ahead.
Ok, vous m'entendez bien? Je peux parler en français?
Ok, please. Oui, bien sûr.
Oui, je vous remercie. Je remercie les intervenants. Ils ont bien exposé. Et plus particulièrement, ceux qui ont attaqué le dernier intervenant, Monsieur Kambali. Kambali a souligné particulièrement donc qu'il fallait s'attaquer non seulement aux criminels congolais, mais aussi aux autorités criminelles des pays environnants. Je voudrais relater le fait que ces autorités ont été particulièrement instrumentalisées. Est-ce que vous pensez que les gens qui les ont envoyés, qui leur ont donné la mission qu'ils ont réalisée, est-ce que ces gens ne constitueront pas des obstacles majeurs pour l'institution et la création du tribunal pénal international pour le Congo, puisque les pays défendent leurs intérêts et ces intérêts, vous voyez que ce sont des multinationaux qui sont derrière, qui ont financé. S'ils ne sont pas visés, ou bien si le tribunal se met en place, il y aura des vétos d'abord pour leur mise en place par ces pays qui ont missionné les autorités voisines qui ont été des criminels. Maintenant, ma question, il faudrait plutôt viser, n'est-ce pas, à non seulement ces autorités voisines du Congo, mais encore viser ces multinationales qui sont derrière, qui ont donné la mission, afin que si jamais il y a une pression internationale, une pression telle que vous le dites, des activistes tels qu'Amnesty qui a lancé une pétition qu'il faudrait soutenir et appuyer, et d'autres pétitions en cours, afin que il n'y ait pas de veto à l'institution du tribunal, à la création du tribunal, mais encore que les gens, tout un chacun, soient sensibilisés à cette création pour que l'impunité cesse. C'est l'impunité qui cause problème, c'est l'impunité qui est à la base de tout ce qui arrive au peuple congolais et aussi ce qui est arrivé au peuple hutu rwandais qui a été martyrisé au Congo. Vous n'êtes pas les seuls Congolais, il y a aussi des Rwandais qui ont été éliminés et qui ont vécu ce génocide hutu au Congo. Et je crois qu'aujourd'hui aussi, ça continue puisqu'il y a des gens qui continuent à mourir ou qu'on continue à ramener au Rwanda et puis les retourner au Congo, les mettre au front comme canon de chair. Il y a tout cela qu'il faudrait dénoncer et dénoncer de manière à ce qu'il y ait non seulement le rapport mapping, mais encore l'impunité des crimes ultérieurs. Je vous remercie.
Okay, before someone, I think Vava will be invited to address this question. I would like just to summarize the question for Dr. Dutoit. The question is about the international involvement. So what is pointed out is that there have been multinational companies involved, and there must be some forms of justice to deal with multinational companies, as well as some countries, some of them are members of the UN Security Council, they can use their veto rights to intervene in the process of creating any international criminal tribunal for the Congo. And then there must be different mechanisms in place to deal with all of these kind of obstacles that might happen in the process. And then he also pointed out that the victims identified in the crimes in the mapping report are not only the Congolese, but some of them, or most of them are also Rwandans, particularly. And then there have been also some Rwandans crossing the borders, coming to the Congos, and then being involved in the war, and then going back to Rwanda. And then all of this complexity must be dealt with in the process of bringing a long-lasting peace in the DRC. Broadly speaking, that is the issue he mentioned. Thank you. Can you say something about it?
Okay, shall I speak in French or English? I'm going to attempt.
Summarize in both languages so that I don't need to do so.
Okay, so la première chose à dire, il y a deux réponses ici. La première est que le Rwandais devrait faire une sorte de trouver une solution à leur problème. Donc, il y a réellement un problème rwandais qui existe. Un problème qui est, d'une manière ou d'une autre, un peu colonial entre les Hutus et les Tutsis, que l'Allemagne avait créé, que la Belgique a continué et qui a mené le Rwanda au génocide de 1994. Donc, il y a un problème rwandais qui devrait être résolu par le Rwandais, parmi eux. Là, ce n'est pas un problème de nous. Il n'y avait aucun Congolais qui était impliqué dans le génocide rwandais. Et donc, le Rwandais devrait vraiment trouver une solution à leur problème. Là, c'est la première chose à dire. Le deuxième problème plus important, c'est que M. Joseph a mentionné, et que voilà, si ces personnes ont été envoyés par des multinationales, est-ce qu'il n'y aura pas de veto consort? Bien sûr, il y a ces possibilités, mais n'oubliez pas, moi, je pense que nous sommes dans la majorité, non seulement la majorité au Congo, mais nous sommes dans la majorité internationalement. Lumumba l'avait dit que voilà, le peuple du monde se trouvera toujours aux côtés des Congolais qui vont se battre pour la liberté, pour le freedom. Donc, moi, je pense que nous sommes dans la majorité. Je pense que non, même le blanc, et même parmi le blanc, il y a des personnes qui n'acceptent pas que ce genre de crimes soient impunis, que ce genre de crimes puissent continuer, que les tueries au Congo puissent continuer, que le viol de femmes congolaises puisse continuer. Donc moi, je pense que nous sommes dans la majorité et l'un de nos travaux, ce que j'expliquais en avant, ce processus de la justice, donc l'un de nos travaux, c'est vraiment essayer d'expliquer au monde, essayer de réveiller tout le monde entier à comprendre ce qui se passe au Congo. Une fois que le monde est bien réveillé sur ce qui se passe au Congo, moi je pense qu'on y arrivera au deuxième point qui est la justice, donc la création de ce tribunal pénal international au Congo et tous les crimes qui ont été commis au Congo contre les Congolais ou documentés par l'ONU ou par des autres organisations congolaises, moi j'ai l'espoir que ces crimes seront, le personne responsable will be held accountable. Donc il y a ces choses-là. Donc, in a nutshell, Professor Dutoit, what I was trying to explain in French was there were sort of two elements, two answers here. One is there is definitely a Rwandan problem. This is why there was genocide in 1994. This is why there was a dictatorship in Rwanda under Habyarimana for many years, and the genocide happened and so on and so forth. These problems in Rwanda goes back to, one can argue, the colonial time, when Rwanda was a German colony, the Belgian which continue that put those policies of discriminations favoring the Tutsis over the Hutus, creating conflict, internal conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis, divide to rule basically, which then in 1994 on Independence Day led Rwanda into an explosion, and in 1993 became a genocide. So the Rwandan people need to find a solution to their problems. They need to have, they need to, and there are a few Rwandan people whom I know are also trying to find a solution. I know there is a lady called Victoire Ingabire who spent many years in prison because he challenged Paul Kagame. There is the Hotel Rwandan guy, Paul Rusesabagina, who saved many Tutsis during the genocide, who is now in prison because Kagame does not accept that anyone else can be a hero of that genocide by him or his people. So there is definitely a Rwandan problem that needs to be sorted, and I'm hoping the Rwandan people would find the courage that the Congolese people have found in fighting for justice and in finding solutions. And then the second problem in terms of whether or not there will be vetoes internationally against the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. I don't believe so. I think we, the people, we are in the majorities. I think goodwill people across the world, whether they are Congolese or not, whether they are white or not, whether they are black or not, would support the cause for justice. They will support the cause for peace. So I think my job, our job, is essentially finding ways to mobilize all those people, goodwill people across the world, to support, the cause for peace, the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. So in a nutshell, that's really what I was trying to say. You had your hand up.
Professor Maswana, can I continue? Can I make a comment? You are muted.
No, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of comments to make. First of all, I just want to say that I'm very honored to be on this panel with Michelle Musovuli and Tampa, who are clearly two very accomplished advocates for justice internationally, and I've learned a great deal about listening to both of them, and especially the earlier contribution by Michelle Musovili was really touching. Thank you for that. It really touched my heart, and I think that Mr. Kampa, also your fight for justice on the international stage is commendable from my point of view, and I am sure South Africans, there are two kinds of forces out of South Africa. There's the multinational force, and they are keen on the goods in the ground in the Congo, and they're probably part of the problem. And then there is the human rights community that I think that you will know about us, and I'm sure that also from our point of view, many of us would support the kinds of initiatives that you are standing for. I want to make a couple of comments though. if I may, within the intimacy, if I may assume that intimacy within the African continent. The one is that the moment of the Nuremberg trials that Kambala mentioned was the moment that the West primarily committed itself to this ideal of human rights, and following something that they saw evil eye to eye and said never again, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights came from that, etc. Of late, I think, especially during the Trump era, we've lost faith in that paradigm. I do not know that the commitment is as strong or at all there, really, towards human rights as it used to be. And there is a professional class of people like maybe yourselves and me who are there and promoting and talking the language, but the real political buy-in in this is diminished. Is diminished. Now, with the Biden era coming on board, I think it's a time to really press forward on this agenda. If you were to, because what I think the Trump era is telling us is that you can't take for granted the commitment to human rights. The kind of sophisticated arguments that you are bringing forward about international justice, and thank you for that too, because, having an international court, that means that you can hold other people accountable. I personally have always been in favor of hybrid courts because I feel like it's closer to the people and it leaves a legacy behind in the country where it's working, and so on. And the international tribunals have been mixed success. But your point that this is an international conflict, and therefore you need to be able to summon people from other countries, etc., by virtue of their commitment to treaties on the international legal stage, I think it's well taken. And so I understand that, and I think it's a good point. However, that sort of sophisticated argument would not even make it past the doormat of the Trump administration. It's not something they understand, quite frankly. It's not something that the underwriter of the Western human rights dispensation would entertain. Now you've got to turn the ship around, and it's going to take a while and all that. But I think that's an important thing just to realize, is that the international human rights commitment is shallower, I think, than it has been for a long time, and it's immensely worrying. So that probably means that we need to be smarter in the way we bring our message across, and work also with our colleagues in the private sector on that. But I'm saying that as somebody who is very concerned with that. The second point I want to make is that I think that it may sound cheap to talk about reconciliation in this context. With all these people getting killed and people getting scot-free away and people coming across the border wreaking havoc. It sounds a bit naive, but I believe ultimately justice creates the space for reconciliation. And even if the original battle was not between Congolese, this battle, this horrific time, have hardened boundaries between people within the Congo also. It must have done. This is how it operates everywhere. And so in your, in your diaspora groups, that representativity, that inclusion, to speak with one voice from all the groups in the Congo, that's an incredibly important contribution you can make, is to make sure that your voices are speaking on behalf of all of Congolese, from the west to the east, and unify. And I'm sure you're doing that. I'm simply talking from a distance, but that is very, very important. That's where reconciliation comes in, because if you don't create that unified front, then you entrench, I think, the conflict within the systems that you create for the next generation. And the Congo needs to build a unified country out of this. So I think the Congo, I'm afraid to say, the Congo is on its own, really, in a way, on this. And the Congo has got to muster its own resources, find its good people everywhere, and organize like never before around your own people, in your own groups, lobbying this with your friends that you know understand human rights, and they're far and few between right now in the world. And I think this is something South Africa is growing up to as well. We're understanding now that, you know, what used to be our friends is a superficial, the world has changed dramatically. The attention is no longer here. The attention is east-west. It is between China and America. That's where the, you know, and we have to earn that space. So I would say we have to look inward and so on. But I understand and I take the point that an international tribunal could play a huge role. I understand how that could get international actors to be held accountable. I also understand how that can rise above political interference. But there's no shortcut, I don't think, over their heads. In the long run, you have to get those political leaders on board. You have to get your factions on board, and you got to start speaking as a Congolese people. If you have a fridge in the house, which we do, and that fridge has no lock on it, as our fridge has no lock on it, no food ever stays in that fridge. It always gets pillared by my children before I get to it, and it's always empty. The DRC is a fridge without a lock on it, and people will pillar it until there's a lock put on it by the people of the DRC to say, no, we are no longer tolerating you on our, and here's how we're going to deal with it. We've got enough people, enough resources. Here's how we're organizing ourselves to deal with it. As long as that fridge door is open, and by God, this is not your fault. This is historical gift. This has been bequeathed to you by colonialism in the most horrific way. But to gain control over that, I think, is very important. And as a unified nation, I don't know a shortcut to that, but that is my final contribution, Mr. Chair. And also just to say that I'm immensely privileged to be on this panel, and please count on my support in the future going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's first take the last two questions, then our two other speakers can make their final comments by combining, taking into account the last question by Miss Mimi Witenkate. Okay, sorry if I take it wrong. Please, you switch on your mic and okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I don't have a question, but rather just a statement. I'm of an opinion. First of all, thank you to our guests, Vavan Tampa and Kambale Musavuli, and the gentleman who just spoke from Justice Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, South Africa. Thank you. I think being Congolese first and being from South in Shabunda, for me, I really, my outcry is for justice. I want justice. People have to be both accountable, and people have to be punished. People have to, our people who have suffered so much over 2 decades have had enough. We don't want to cry anymore. We don't want to you know, we really want peace, we're demanding peace, but first of all, we want to see those people in power who continue to thrive in their roles, both to justice. And that's basically what I just had to give that opinion. And that's it. Thank you very much for this opportunity to, again, to carry on the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, Kambale, do you have last words, last comment in 1 minute, please?
I don't think there is a 1 minute in the Congo, but I will try 45 seconds. Mimi's last note just touched me because it's always a constant reminder of what we are struggling. I want to invite Dr. Dutoit to dream with me. We have an impossible problem. My math professor told me a lie when I was young. I love math. He told me that square root of negative x is I square root of x. I could not understand it. I said, how is it possible that you have a square root of a negative number? And then he said, no, the negative is still there. There is an I in the front of the square root of x. Then I said, what is this I? And he said, it's an imaginary number. Then I told him, you made it up. I said, yes. Right? So they made up a solution to an impossible problem, which today has created differential equations that is actually used to treat cancer, solve questions of predicting where a space shuttle will land and so on. Differential equations are actually part of our lives today. But it took somebody to look at an impossible problem and say that it's possible. And I believe that South Africa has a lot to share with us. It's how we are going to frame the Congo problem. As long as we look at the Congo problem as a Congolese problem, it will never be solved. Congo's problem is an African problem. Apartheid could not be defeated if the entire world did not come at the rescue of the South Africans. Can you imagine South Africans fighting the apartheid regime and say, hey, South Africans, you're on your own, right? That you have to resolve that. And I remember speaking to a Senegalese who told me that when he was young, in his chalkboard, his teacher always wrote on the top of the chalkboard, apartheid is a crime against humanity. In Senegal, before teaching. So everybody became clear. So that's the challenge of the Congolese, is to transcend our issue and say there is a province called the Congo, there is a province called Rwanda, there is a province called Uganda on the continent called Africa, where their neighbors are implicated. And that every single African, every single ally in the world and see what Che Guevara said, Congo's problem is the world's problem. So when we achieve that, then we will have a chance, because the people who are committing these crimes, they're not just in Kinshasa, they're not just in Kigali, they're not just in Kampala, they're international. And it will take an international solution to it. This is important for us this month of October. I'm saying October, November, right? It's a decade after the release of the UN mapping exercise report. No actions, concrete actions has been taken toward it. There is inadequacy from the Congolese leadership to act on it. I will say just one sentence and I will read it because it's important for Congolese people to know this. On Wednesday, September 24th, 2003, the then Major General Joseph Kabila, president of the DRC then, said this at the United Nations, at the General Assembly. On the international level, we believe that the major objective is the establishment, with the assistance of the United Nations, of an international criminal tribunal for the DRC to deal with crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, including rape, used as a weapon of war, and mass violations of human rights. Many Congolese are surprised of me reading this sentence. I just say that Joseph Kabila, in 2003, he did not have a gun on his head, he did not have like handcuffs, voluntarily in 2003 spoke at the United Nations and called for the International Tribunal for Congo to try war crimes, crimes against humanity, including rape. 2003, before the UN mapping exercise report. The current president of the Congo hasn't even gotten close to say this sentence. Congolese as a whole are saying, in order for us to move forward, we can't continue to see the people who committed crimes in front of us on national TV, talking to us about Minembwe, about other issues that we have without actually dealing with the crimes, right? So Congolese are united right now in the call for the creation of an international tribunal for Congo. The call for allies that we are asking everyone around the world to support the call from Congolese is going to be a difficult task. It's going to be a differential equation. But in the end, I believe, Dr. Dutoit and everyone watching, that we will be able to see that tribunal. Because if justice doesn't come, peace can come. If peace can come, we're saying that Congo doesn't exist. But Congo is so central for the development of Africa that all of us have to figure out ways to engage, join us, participate wherever you are in supporting this call. And in our lifetime, we will see peace in the DRC.
Thank you. Vava?
I think all the key point has been mentioned already. I'm going to essentially repeat, but to paraphrase some of those key points. Peace begins with justice. Without justice, there is no peace. The last 20 years has proven that. Because we have put justice on the side, there's still no peace. The largest peacekeeping missions in the world, but there's still no peace. Elections organized, but there's still no peace. Humanitarian aid given, but there's still no peace. Budgetary support given to the Congolese government, but there's still no peace. Retraining of Congolese soldiers, police forces by the UN, by the US, by the Belgians, by the French, but there's still no peace. Deployment of South African forces, Tanzanian forces, other forces across the continent into Congo to defeat militia gangs and so warlords, but there's still no peace. Sanctions against Paul Kagame, against Rwanda, against different people involved, implicated in the killings of Congolese people, but there's still no peace. That's because peace begins with justice. There is no alternative to it. We need to address issues of justice. In the same way Mimi has explained, in the same way Kambale has explained, in the same way many Congolese have explained over the years, there is no other way forward but justice. So the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo is non-negotiable. And it's a process. And in that process, all of us, that process begins with truth, speaking the truth, being able to say clearly people are being killed in Congo, speaking up. That's the reason we use the 4S, speaking up against these killings, being able to pinpoint that person A, person B is responsible for the killings. When Felix Tshisekedi, our president, decided to promote a warlord into army inspector in July, the same month in which 250 people were killed in Kipopo, we need to be able to speak up against it. Okay, that is the first step, and we need to mobilize, organize ourselves to push for this creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. There is no other way around it. So whatever we do, in our different ways across the world, we need to make sure it's geared towards the creation of an international criminal tribunal for Congo. It was done in Nuremberg after the Second World War, after the killing of 6 million Jews by Hitler. It was done in the Balkans, for the Balkans, after ethnic cleansing. It was done for Rwanda after the genocide in 1994. We have seen the international community coming together to create similar codes for different communities across the world. The Congolese people have been crying for more than 20 years, and we have paid dearly for that. we are continuing to bury our dead. But even during our mourning of our dead, we would also continue to fight for justice. We would continue, we would go to the court tomorrow and bury our dead at night. But justice, it is non-negotiable. Justice, justice, justice.
Thank you very much, Vava.
I want to say something, please.
Before closing, we are already 20 minutes past the time we were supposed to close the event. And then I would like to thank all of you. And then let's keep in mind that what we are doing as part of this session of reflection is honoring the suffering of the victims. What we are going to do from now on is making sure that we recognize the victims, we contribute in restoring their dignity, and that we help in reducing the pain and suffering of the survivors by pushing for the creation of an appropriate justice system, which should necessarily include an international criminal tribunal system, and to some extent, reconciliation process as well. The organizer of this webinar series on the UN mapping report on the crime committed in the DRC have joined some other activists, and one of them is the Dr. Denis Mukwege, in calling for justice, in reinforcing the call for justice as a necessary steps toward peace in the DRC. Together, we believe that the people of the DRC have hopes and aspiration for peace, and peace will only be achieved if they are founded on, as Vava and Dr. Dutoit and Kambale put it roughly, peace will only be achieved if it is founded on accountability. The difference between a human society and the animal species is, among others, based on the concept of justice. Animals, no matter what kind of animal, when we observe them, they don't have any justice system. We humans separated from the other species, animal species, by building forms of justice and pushing, implementing the ideal of fairness. And the DRC will never return to a human society in which we can live, prosper, and contribute to the progress of Africa or the international community without making sure that we have been able to break the cycle of impunity. And then these networks, this effort that we are doing is one small contribution toward that bigger aspiration of the people of the DRC. Therefore, we call upon all government and people of goodwill to work for peace and justice in the DRC, and not only in the DRC, but elsewhere else, because we need to learn from other people's experience, and we need also contribution by others, because as some of the speakers have said, the DRC is one province of the mother continent called Africa. So we need the contribution of everyone, and we call upon all government and the people of goodwill to engage clearly, actively, decisively in supporting the ongoing campaign for the creation of the International Criminal Tribunal for the DRC. Toward this end, we are currently planning, we are currently discussing, exploring the possibility of setting up a networks of volunteers to join hands around large platforms of Congolese and non-Congolese to try to see how we can take this fight, this struggle to the next step and make sure that the current generation engaged in this fight is the last to be concerned with the cycle of impunity. It should stop with our generation. If you believe you share that dream, join us, contact us. We will share the email on the YouTube this webinar, and get in touch so that you can contribute. And keep in mind, remember the 4S that Vava talked about. Try to share the message, speak out, sign petition, and support and amplify the DRC voices. Once again, thank you so much for your participation. Next Friday, we are going to focus on the mapping report and children, because that will be the International Day for Children. The webinar will be in French, and please make sure that you join us. Once again, thank you so much, and we look forward to interacting with you and together pushing forward this call for the creation of the criminal tribunal for the DRC. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We're free Congo.
Thank you. Aluta continua.